Okay, thanks for tuning into Stampscaping 101. I've been working on some designs, but I just really felt like doing some stamping, and in this case I did some coloring because I found a previously stamped composition. I believe it was about the structures or something like that, so I thought I'd just finish it off, and I thought, well, let's not really make a huge commitment to, some tons of layers of dye-based inks or something like that, and I just experimented around with some alcohol pens on this, colored pencil, and a bit of pigment ink, so it's kind of fun to use. This is a glossy cardstock, okay, but I was surprised at how the Prismacolors applied onto the glossy cardstock, just as long as I used enough pressure. But what was interesting is when I went back with the alcohol pens, because the colored pencil is really sitting right on the surface of the glossy cardstock. It's not getting absorbed into, the tooth of the paper at all. I was able to blend the colored pencil marks almost too much. It kind of wiped right off with the alcohol, which kind of makes sense, that it would do that. The alcohol and wax probably dissolves that alcohol and it really spreads it around. But if you want to try a kind of an interesting technique, maybe try putting a little bit more of a heavy application of colored pencil and going back into it with a light-toned alcohol pen or a blender pen and just kind of blending it out. It's kind of like some version of like a watercolor pencils, except you're using alcohol to blend the tones instead of water. And I guess it's like, I don't know, some minimalist version of like an encaustic kind of moving wax around on your paper. It doesn't look like it though, because it's very, very subtle, but nevertheless, it's happening on there, so just a real simple scene. Nothing too dramatic, but it's also just a easy application of some colors to kind of finish off a scene in terms of your lighting scheme and color scheme. Okay, I've been working on new designs, or a new design lately, and having fun with that, but I was getting a little bit of stamping withdrawals, so I needed to sit down and stamp something, and I looked at my stack of pre-stamped compositions. I don't remember what this composition was for. It might have been on lead-ins or something like that. Visual lead-ins? I don't remember, but or it might have been structures or something like that, but I thought I would finish this scene off. And it's a quarter-page scene on glossy cardstock. When I picked it up originally, I thought it was on matte, but it is on glossy. But I thought I would try some multimedia on this, and I thought I would do it just in what I used to call simple scapes, sticking with kind of a limited palette range or kind of method in terms of finishing these pieces. So I thought I would go with something like these memento inks and something somewhat of the similar value range in terms of some alcohol pens and maybe even some Prismacolors or something of that sort. I really felt like working in chalks or something like that, but I don't know, I'll just get to this one right now and see what happens with that. But anyways, a good way to start a scene off, if you want to just keep things really simple and you're not quite sure of a type of color scheme, is you can just start off really super light, and that's what I usually start off with in terms of my dye-based ink approaches. But you can do the same thing with alcohol pens, any type of pens really. You can go with, if you have a nice value range where you're looking at some of the colors that are really, really close to, I don't know, maybe a 5% or something like that in terms of a value range. And going with something so light, it's really not making a very large commitment to that color at all. I mean, you can barely see it on here. And that way, when using these types of values, you can really kind of experiment and feel really free to just get right on into the scene, because basically what you put down is barely noticeable. Alright, so what I'm doing right here is I'm just kind of, it almost feels like I'm using a blender pen or something like that. This is so light, but I'm just going in here and filling up this entire water. Now this water area is not going to be this color in the end, and that's one of the differences to layering your inks onto your scene, okay? It's not like coloring like a certain area. Well, I mean, these days people are doing a lot of different transitions of values within like a given space, and that's just basically what this is doing. So what I'm doing is I'm just going in here and I'm adding it right into the water. Sometimes winter scenes, the water is in contrast with the whiter, snowy terrain. So when I'm doing like a springtime scene or something like that where the grass is really dark and green or plush or something like that, a lot of times I'll leave my water light to get that contrast going from water to land. In this case it's going from water to land, but in this case the water is just the opposite. It's going to be the thing that's darker. Okay, now within the design itself I can see some shadows rendered in the design, and I'm just going and reiterating it with some additional ink, which means that I'm adding additional value to it, you know, in terms of light and dark. Alright, you can see some little rocks here and there, and while this won't show up in the end result very much, this is kind of giving me a little bit of a, I don't know, kind of a feel for you know, where I'm adding this pen, and that way when I get to the darker pens, you know, I will have added enough of this in here just to get my kind of movement going, getting in the flow of things. Okay, this cloud right here is stamped kind of upside down. I mean, it can go right side up or upside down, but it's usually this way. But in this case I have it kind of upside down, so it's more bottom lit. So again, I'm just kind of going in here and rendering this cloud. Well, it's not really rendering it, shading it a lot more, okay? And I'm adding it where there's a lot of shading on the stamp itself. So the lighter areas of cloud I'm just leaving illuminated, meaning I'm just not coloring over it, okay? And sometimes for compositional purposes I like to create a little bit of a vignette around on the edges of the card, so I can kind of come in here and kind of darken my perimeter somewhat. This is called pale blue, you know, and it is very pale blue. A lot of people would find kind of, this came in a set here, but a lot of people wouldn't find this to be a terribly useful type of value. It's just so light it barely shows up, and most people are coloring things, they want that color to show up, but I find my lighter colors to be very valuable in terms of being able to kind of establish your lighting scheme and get a good foundation of color going with it, okay? Even though it's not, you don't really have a good foundation of value going with it, you know, dark to light, but, you know, it's a perfect thing to kind of establish your tone a little bit. You can see it here and here. There's a little bit of white left over, but that's because I've just kind of gone in here like this and darkened those areas a touch, especially in the shadows. Okay, now that would kind of be the equivalent of like a shadow stamping blue ink. It's just very, very pale. Okay, let's move up. Let's take this one right here. This is a little bit of a violet tone, but I don't have a huge amount of pens. Okay, this one's aquamarine. That would be okay too. Maybe I'll go with that one. Let me see what else I have here. This one's azure. A little bit darker, but I'm working incrementally darker. Okay. Alright. Kind of going in. Yeah, I can see it. Adding it around my snowy rocks in here. You don't have to be perfect either. You know, some of it can go on to the objects around it. You can do little streaks in here. Doesn't have to go down smooth. You can create those little striations in the water if you want to. Anyways, you can kind of see that coming around. Looks a little bit more icy, maybe. And you can come into your clouds again and hit some of these shadow areas a little bit more. Maybe the area underneath the clouds and the landscape could have a deeper value, darker value. Same thing out here, creating a little bit more of a kind of a vignette around the edges. Okay. Still not too dark of a blue. It might be, the first one might have been a 5%. This one's probably about a 10 or 15%, I'm guessing. Putting some kind of in back of this tree to make this stand out a little bit more. I did have some of this blue over my structure here. Just to, I'll put some tans and things over that, but I like to create that continuity between the colors on the outside or on the perimeter and kind of the colors that are going on within each one of these objects. So even if it doesn't look like it at the end, it'll have kind of a foundation of a similar hue. And that way things will look a little bit more kind of related in terms of the scene lighting. Okay? So in other words, if this was a sunset scene or something like that, chances are that sunset color would be on our objects. But this one happens to be a cooler one, so I'm just adding that cooler temperature right on over to it as well. Okay, maybe I'll use a little bit of smaller version of this. As opposed to kind of a, you know, wider area of that hue, the blue. Okay, the first one is the same, the first color was the same hue, but it was just of a lighter value. Okay, going around, coloring these little rocks in here, putting a little bit of a shadow at the base of it. Okay, adding shadows really kind of gives your objects a bit of a kind of visual weight. So then kind of underneath the eaves, right in here, underneath there, you can kind of hit that whole area in there where it would be dark. On this wheel, back in here, so right in it at the base of it. It gives it that visual weight. It kind of makes it look like it's casting a shadow. Okay. Alright, let's see. It's looking a little bit too blue. Why don't we move into some different grays? There's a cool gray 1 and a cool gray 3. I have no idea how many grays there are. I don't know if it kind of matches with the marker range of colors. It might, I'm not sure. Boy, that is really, really light. This is almost like a blending tool more than it's laying down any kind of discernible value. Okay. Alright. Okay, this one is cool gray 3. 25% maybe, I'm guessing, I don't know. Something like 25-30% gray probably. 0 being completely white and 100% being black. Okay. Gray kind of adds a little bit of a mellow tone to it. Kind of blends things together really well. Okay. Just going in, coloring. Okay. As you can see, it's, you know, it's not really critical, if at all, to be careful about this. Okay, see the rocks down here. When you're working with really light values, you can kind of do whatever you want next to doing like this or something, you know, but within reason. The colors are so light, and you're just working kind of incrementally a little bit darker with each pen, if you have them, all right? And each step doesn't, you know, make too big of a jump, so it's easy to kind of manipulate things. Now, when I start getting a little bit darker, what I do is I kind of go back and I'll blend in those colors a little bit more. You know, when things start getting a little bit dark, before it kind of sets up, it really gives you time, you know, in terms of alcohol pens, to kind of blend that tone in, and before it sets up and it becomes kind of, you know, less malleable. Okay, this is Aquamarine again? Okay, I think I already used this one. I just added some of that gray, so that changed the spirit of it a little bit, which I wanted. Okay, now I'm going back in and just doing the aquamarine again. It adds a little bit more. It won't get any darker, you know, at some point in time. Like right now, you know. Using that existing ink, you'll have to move up in value. Okay, now this is an azure blue. It's kind of a, it's getting there in terms of your blues, your medium blues. Alright, so maybe you can be a little bit more selective the darker you go. Kind of hitting the areas where there are shadows, you know, where there's darker areas in the design. And I'm adding that darker. Yeah, it's not a dark blue, it's medium blue, but it's darker than everything I've used so far. So you see that range, you see that kind of that range of values, that variation now, you know, so it's not just one blue, it's transitioning, okay? Areas right around these rocks in here. Let's add some little details, okay? So let me just add a little bit more of a shadow. Meaning just kind of color right over them. And you're saying that those rocks are not transparent, so they are casting their shadow. And that thing makes things a little bit more dimensional and kind of rich in terms of your surfaces here. Okay. Adding a little shadow to the watermill. Areas that are a little bit darker, we can put more of that color. Okay. That mill won't be blue in the end, you know, there'll be different hues throughout there, okay. Now see, all I'm doing is there's some texture on the design, so I'm going in, just following that texture again. Doesn't have to be kind of a mystery as far as adding values to your scenes. Okay. you can just, in the beginning, you can just kind of follow the, you know, follow the design. Then you'll find, when you get the hang of that, then you can kind of manipulate and, you know, define your own lighting scheme wherever you really want it to go. And you don't have to, you know, I mean, at no point in time do you have to follow what's going on in the designs at all, but that, I'm just saying that that's an easy way to do it, you know, to do kind of define scene lighting. Alright, let's take a look here. We have a largely cool colored scheme right here. Well, it's all cool colored. Now this is apricot. Let's add a warm touch to this, okay? Here's your watermelon stamp image. Just coloring the whole thing. See, if this was a really dark color, I couldn't do this, right? Alright? Because it would be just too dark. It would, you'd have these squiggle marks all over the place. Alright? But, being that it's very light, you can just go over the whole thing. It's a very, very light hue. Alright, what do we have here? Brownish gray and sepia. Okay, it's pretty dark, right? It's probably a 50% or 60. That one's even darker. Let me see if I have something lighter than that to transition maybe into those other darker colors. This one's beige and camel. Let's try those two first. Okay. Yeah, that one's almost a bit too light. Barely anything. If I got anything. Now see, what I can do too with these really light tones is I can kind of add some of this, you know, reflecting off your snow or whatever. There's a slight warm tinge in here now. You know, so that watermelon isn't the only thing that's has a little bit of warmth in it. You can put some of your clouds. This is what's really great about something so light. You can just go right into there and just have this barely kind of this pen is not dry. It's just very, very light. Okay. Copics make, you know, they have any huge number of you know, different values of everything too. So, you know, just your alcohol pens, you know, they're typically it's typically quite a range in terms of their different offerings. Alright, this is brownish gray here. It looks pretty dark right here, but when I start adding it down to my image, it doesn't look too much darker. Add in your dark areas. Alright, brownish gray. Let's see. Well, let's try this one. This one's the sepia. I don't color the whole thing. I want some variation within my structures. So, putting a few lines here and there. There's kind of the wood direction on the line stamp design, and I kind of go along with that direction of the wood a lot of times. Okay. Let's see. Going back to my lighter tone. No, it's not the light tone. Hey, there's that one. There we go. Apricot beige, either one. And just kind of blend it in a little bit. This is glossy paper, so that alcohol ink, I don't know if it, you know, how it'll be 2 days from now, and so it's really set into the paper, but if I want to kind of manipulate it, I can make it much lighter just by going into it and, you know, using an alcohol pen. It turns that ink back into solution. So, you know, you can do that. You know, it's just like a blending pen. In terms of the manipulation aspect of it, you can go and alter things. Alright, let's go back to this brownish gray and add some of this here and there. Underneath the eave on the windmill, watermill. It needs an anchor point though, doesn't it? Now see, we've gotten a lot darker up there, so I want to anchor my watermill down a little bit more with some additional tone, and I'll give that watermill a shadow down here. Let's add a little bit of this color. It's the brownish gray that I put down into the snow just to, you know, have some of those colors kind of reflected in that area. Okay, let's see here. This is a cool gray number 5. All right. Okay, making it look a little bit more rustic. I'm not coloring the whole thing in. I'm leaving kind of variation on that mill. See, I'm kind of bringing some of that color down into this area. Some of the values. Let's put a few little details on the roof. A little bit harsh, okay? But you just go back into it with your lighter tone and blend that in a little bit, okay? So you go, you know, I kind of work from light to dark and then back to light again to blend things in a touch. Okay. Alright, I want a little bit more blue back down underneath that mill, I think. Casting a shadow. Alright, now I don't know if it'll show up. Sometimes I can use a little bit of Prismacolor, believe it or not, on a glossy surface. It just depends on the pencil, though. Some of them are soft enough where you can get some different marks with that. Let me try. Probably not, but this is a slate gray. I'm getting a slight slate mark on there. I'm just kind of doing a little bit of a transition in some of these areas. Let's say right here I'm giving that a bit of a tone right there, okay? Right along here, just saying that that area is curved a little bit from kind of more horizontal to vertical. In those areas, the horizontal places would kind of be lighter because they're capturing the lighting, and then on the sides, I don't know, you know, like down here, it's shadow, okay, because the light is coming from like above my hand or on my wrist or whatever. So that's the concept there. So when we move into rounded things like that, you can just kind of I mean, this isn't the ideal thing here. Let me see if I can get this to show up at all. I'll have to go probably a little bit darker. Yeah, that one shows it. I had to go kind of dark, but this is a Copenhagen blue. Not the best one. I'd rather have a kind of a grayish blue, but you can kind of see it here. Actually, the harder I press, the more of a mark I get. Maybe I was being too gingerly with it. I'm used to working with dye-based inks. Okay, kind of see it around on this. Oops. Kind of right there and along that. You know, see that blue right there? That's this pencil. Again, I'll do the same along the edge of this water right here, hopefully giving a little bit more dimension to this, just really in a very simple way, you know. And I'm sure like someone that's schooled in colored pencil would be able to do a much, much better job than me, but I don't know, it's adequate, I guess. And I hardly ever use colored pencil, but I do like it a lot. I'm just not very good at it. But stamping's a very forgiving medium. And no reason to not try new things. Again, putting a little bit of a shadow around a lot of these rocks. Colored pencil, you can really have quite a bit of control, you know, just over the hue that you've chosen, value, of course, and pressure. Okay, you see a little darker horizon. I can put a little bit of that up there as well. Okay. When you're using a colored pencil, be pretty close to, you know, if not completely done with stamping imagery on, you know, your scenes. Be, you know, because I doubt like any dye-based inks will stick to that wax, you know, surface that's on there now. So get all your stamping out of the way. Foreground, you know, people, animals, whatever, little details. Get it done before you add something like colored pencils or something like that into the piece. Okay, alright. That area down there could use some additional value to anchor it into the scene. Let me try black. I'm surprised this isn't smaller. Maybe I've repurchased black before. Okay. of just going, you know, creating some little bit of a line work back into the, you know, with the grain of the wood and whatnot. Alright, now let me add... I usually don't use black to do my shadows, but I don't think it hurt. And then again, I can reiterate the edge of this water area where water meets bank and snow. I can use it as shadows underneath some of these rocks. Reiterating the shadows again. Okay. Trying to think if I want to kind of introduce a slightly different hue into this, and I think I might. This is periwinkle, a little bit of purplish tinge to it, okay? I thought that might match the kind of the that wood, well, maybe a little bit more than blue, or blue kind of independently. I can kind of blend in some of this tone to it. Interesting, this alcohol is making the, it's kind of liquefying my colored pencil, the wax. Very interesting. Alright, so that is that. I don't know, it gave it a slightly, I don't know, or purplish tinge in a couple areas. Nothing extreme. Alright, now let's see something. Let's add in some pigment ink effects into the scene to make it look a little bit more frosty. This is a very, very dry pad. I'm going with a cotton swab. Okay, I'm going to blot off some of this before I take it in here, and in doing so I'm kind of smashing the tip and loosening it up a little bit. And hopefully we can add kind of a bit of a foggy look to it in some areas. I can add some of this down, but in other areas I'll just leave it as is so that I'm not kind of overdoing it too much. Overdoing it a little bit is okay, certainly. Okay, now at the base of these trees, one of the things I did is I kind of wiped them off before I stamped them in here. Let's transition it a little bit and put some of this pigment ink down here, and that'll make those trees even lighter. And hopefully that will look like there's some kind of low-lying fog. See that right there? Kind of hovering on the ground, and I'll do the same thing for these trees over here. Okay, I'll put some in front of some of these rocks, or all of some of those rocks. Okay. water's edge. Looks pretty good with a little bit of kind of like steam rising. Yeah, a little bit too much over here. Let me wipe some of that off. I wipe off often just as much ink as I apply because sometimes it's just too much in a certain area. Alright, bottom light some of these clouds a little bit. Make them look a little bit kind of softer and more billowy and maybe illuminated. Because when you do that, you're kind of making some of these areas that are inked a little bit more translucent. So it becomes more dimensional because where I'm adding this this pigment ink, you can see the imagery underneath it, but it's just softer looking, so you get that element of texture going. See, right along these banks here, I'm just kind of adding a little bit here and there. Okay. Background hill might be a little bit more obscured because it's so distant. Alright, so a little bit of foggy, kind of misty area in here. Let's make that tree a little bit more obscured. That. Same thing over here. This one kind of represents something a little bit closer to you because it's lower on the composition, lower on the horizon. So you can see these trees here, partially fog, partially not. You still have those crisp areas. So that's where you get that kind of that variation that kind of helps a scene. Alright. A little bit of fog. I don't know. I'm adding more than I thought I would. Because I like the way it looks and there. Every scene will be different. You might do one scene, do the exact same composition and color scheme again, and it really could come out looking quite a bit different just because of the amount of variation and the possibilities of kind of that happen throughout. Alright, let's take gel pen and add in some additional highlights to the scene. Yeah, I was looking at that. I want that mill to be a little bit more obscured. gel pen. I'm just going in here and adding some little areas of light. I'm kind of adding it in the lighter area, okay? And then I'll kind of transition it out into the darker areas, but in the darker areas there's going to be less dots because in the darker areas you're seeing that shadow and you wouldn't have as many highlights, if any. Okay. I added a little bit too much ink there, but I just go over with the gel pen ink and then kind of obscure some of that mark. Alright. Same thing down here, I'll add a little bit of texture. Kind of looks like snow, you know, having these little shimmery little bits in here. And that little kind of textured, ripply area down here. See, it's kind of subtle. Followed up here. Some additional marks. This is a 1.0 size roller nib, so I am able to add this right over the top of some of that colored pencil wax texturing or coloring. Sometimes if you're using kind of a smaller one of these, you know, that's not flowing as well, it might be harder to apply it over kind of a wax surface, but 1.0 seems to be doing okay. This one's a Uniball Signo pen too, S-I-G-N-O. Okay. Now, sometimes if you have something dark behind objects like these trees, if you want to, not to outline the entire thing, but you can kind of just add in little bits of kind of snow. You know, I like to do it in the intersections of branches, like right in the I don't know, where things kind of Y out, you know. It becomes a spot for snow to collect. But don't do it everywhere. Just kind of here and there. People will get the point and it won't be so extreme. Plus, if I start adding this everywhere, then I'm probably drawing right over the branch, you know, the black branch, and, you know, then we end up not being able to see really anything. Okay. Here's some branches in the foreground. I can put some snow on some of these. Alright, just a real simple scene. Look at that, I I don't think I used a stylus tool at all, but it's just kind of fun to get in there and do a little multimedia. What do we use? Alcohol ink, colored pencil, gel pen ink, oh, and pigment ink too. That fog type of effect going on in here. So really simple and just easy to do. Coloring using just very light values of most of the hue ink that I've used in here. That got a little bit darker, and you know, not everywhere, but kind of in select areas, just to give it a little bit more of a rustic feel. Okay. All right, so oops. There we have it. Just something really simple. You can do it all with alcohol pens, or you could have done it all with colored pencils. I don't think I would recommend glossy paper for colored pencil, but you know, it got on there. You just have to kind of press a little bit harder, and it probably really does depend on the brand that you're using. I would imagine the relative you know, hardness of the line of colored pencils would matter. This is a little bit of silver right here. I just saw that. Just kind of curious to know if that would show up in here. I guess it does. Trying to see if it looks silverish to me. Not really. Not too much. If at all, it's more just a gray. It probably has some degree of reflective quality, but not too much. Alright, so just a real easy scene. Okay. Really easy scene in terms of the finish on it. But pretty fun. I really enjoy working in those pens like that, and the next time I do a matte one, I'll add a little bit more colored pencil work. But again, just a simple approach, very light tones, reiterating the shading and patterns within the designs. This area down here is dark. You can see all the stippling dots, so just on the edges right in here, and again, just like it is on the design, I just went in and reiterated it with some additional tone. You can see the top of that bluffs and distance. I just darkened those up a little bit. And the darker areas on the cloud, I just took those pens, very light pens, and I darkened those areas up as well. So kind of caps it off. Not super dynamic, but a fun little scene to do. And I don't know, just a real easy one in terms of the control over things. These probably can use still a little bit of variations. Maybe here's a little bit of green if you want to add, you know, a little tinge, you know, of a different color here and there. What's kind of interesting about that colored pencil is that, you know, like I said, if you want to kind of blend those in, you do so with the alcohol pens, and it just works as a blending tool for both alcohol pen marks and the colored pencils. So it's like you kind of lay it down there and just kind of blend it out, unless it's just particular to these two different brands. I don't think so, though. Okay, so anyways, there's a little bit of green and greenish tinge in there, and again, it's just a very, very you know, easy way to work. It's not a big, strong commitment to that color because it's such a light value, so you can almost, I don't know, you can almost do nothing wrong in here. I wouldn't go like this with it, you know, or something like that, but, you know, just layering your tones. In this case, because it's kind of a snowy terrain, it's more of a subtle tonal and temperature gradation. So anyway, if you have any questions, drop me a note in the comment section. Thanks for watching.